So after posting the last video where I added the strings to the guitar, I realized that I did something wrong. When I created the 3D object and I chose cylinder, the problem was when I scaled it. The y-axis is really the length, and instead of scaling it, I shrunk it. So that's the one that really should have gone out to 3, and it really should have been the x and the z that got shrunk down. The 15-degree angle is still correct, it's just it's subtracted. So it would be 90 degrees minus 15 would be 75, and then if you look at this you'll see that it is rounder. So as you can see, that definitely looks like a cylinder now. So I've already replaced the other strings, but I just wanted to take a moment to explain the mistake I made. So now in this video what we're really going to look at is starting to detect successes and fails. So we're going to use collisions to do that. We're going to create a single collider box to detect the fails, so that is the corresponding string was not played, and we're going to have 6 different collider boxes to detect the successes, because we need to make sure that the right string has been played. So 1 for the fail, and an additional 6, 1 for the strings for the success. So let's start with the fail because that's easier. So game object, create empty, and we'll call this fail collider. I'm going to add a component, physics, box collider, edit collider. Oops, let's move this over first so we can see it. Now when you click on edit collider, little dots appear, one on each plane. You just grab that dot, drag and drop it, and it lets you expand the collider in that direction. I'm just going to rotate this a little bit. Okay, I think that's about right. So basically what I'm thinking, we want the note to be played within the last 2 frets. So when they're between there, you can do a successful play. If it goes past there, then it fails. We need to set this to trigger, because we don't want it to be solid. We want the note to be able to pass into it and then be destroyed. So the second part is now giving that instruction to the note. So even after you've created a prefab, you can still make changes to it. So right click, create C#, we'll call it note control. We'll click on fail collider. Actually no, we'll click on note, sorry. We'll click on note and we'll put note control on the note. So we want the note to detect when it hits the fail collider and then do something. So we'll double click on that, and that's something that we want it to do is we want the note to be destroyed, and then later we're going to track that it was a fail. So outside of start, outside of update, void on trigger enter has to be capital O, capital T, capital E, collider other. It's important to differentiate between on trigger enter and on collider enter, on collision enter, excuse me. So on trigger enter collider is when one or more of the objects involved in the collision are triggers, and so that it lets one pass through the other. On collision enter collision other, that's when both objects are solid and they stop each other like 2 cars crashing. Now when a collision enters, we want it to be destroyed, but depending on whether it's a success or a fail depends on other information that we want to track. So rather than just saying destroy, we're going to put in a condition. We're going to say if other, and other is this right here. So if other.gameObject.name equals, and we called it fail collider. So if fail collider is the name that of the object it's collided with, then we want to destroy game object. So game object So destroy game object does just that. It destroys whatever the script is attached to. The script is attached to the note, therefore it destroys the note, but only if what is being collided with is named fail collider. This also lets us stake out a space where we can add other commands as well, like we're going to track that it's a fail and it's going to modify score and that kind of thing. So I think that should be enough to make this work. So we've got the fail collider object, it's in the right position, it's set as a trigger. The note already has its collider, it doesn't need to be set to a trigger. We added a script to it, so I think this should run. And what's going to happen is the note is just going to disappear. Yeah, see how it's not going off the screen anymore? It just suddenly isn't there. So now that we've gotten that, let's start working with the successes. So game object, create empty, and we'll call this success 1 because this will be the success if a note is coming down the first string. This is the one you want to play. So add component, physics, again box collider, but this one needs to be smaller, so like 0.5, 0.5. Depth doesn't matter that much. I'm just going to rotate this around a bit so I can get a better view. Now, the way it's going to work is this. What's going to happen is this is going to be behind the fail collider. Okay? So if you don't play the note comes down and hits the fail collider and gets destroyed. Behind it is the success collider. Okay? So what's going to happen is when you hit the corresponding key for this string, we're going to move this out using velocity, a velocity command, and it will strike the note, and the note will get destroyed before it hits the collider. We're going to check for the fact that it's hit the success collider. Just as we check for the fail, we'll add in another statement to check for the success, and then we'll have it increase your score, that kind of thing. So let's first just get this moving. So we need a script. So create C# script. I'm thinking that I'm going to create a separate script for each note. You can either do one script for all the strings, I should say. So you can either create one script for all the strings or one script for each string. I'm going to do that. And I'll explain why as we get more into the nitty-gritty of it. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to take success 1, we're going to attach, well, before we attach the script, let's go ahead and add physics, rigid body, get rid of gravity. This way we can move it forward. We now attach the script. In the script, we're going to add a key code. Key code looks for the press of a key. So, public key code, and we'll just say activate string. We will click on the success box. Activate string key code is now there, and happened really fast, but I clicked on the drop down and then I chose alpha 1 because I'm going to use the 1 through 6 keys on the keyboard. When I put in the code for the detecting of that key, you can simply swap it out with whatever controller you're using, the code for your controller. So what happens is we want to check for this key being pressed. So if input, because it's looking for player input, get key down, because we don't want it to be rapid fire, you're going to hit the note, the collider comes out, and then retracts. and this is going to be we're looking for activate string. Okay. So if you've pressed the key, we want something to happen. We want the box to move along the z-axis, because as you're moving depth, this is z, okay? So we want it to move out into the string. So what we're going to do is we're going to do get component. We just added a rigid body. Doesn't like it because of the lowercase. Rigid body. Sorry, that should also be that. Get component rigid body velocity, and it's going to be a new vector 3. Oops, sorry. Horizontal, we don't want it to move. Vertical, we don't want to move. We just want to move z. So we'll have it move, let's say, +2. Then we're going to tell it to stop doing that after a certain amount of time. So before we can put in the command to do that, we need to create a separate routine. So outside of start, outside of update, I enumerator, and we'll call it retract collider. So we're going to do yield return new, wait 4 seconds. Let's see, I think half a second is enough. Okay, so don't worry too much about yield return new, just type that in. Really what you care about is this. So yes, you do have to type it in, but as far as understanding what you're doing, this is really what you're doing. You're telling it to wait for half a second. This doesn't have to have an F if it's a whole number, so if you're saying 1, 2, 3, 4, F doesn't have to be there, it's simply there because it's a decimal. So, and like I said, this is measured in seconds. So, and then I'm going to copy this, paste it, make a change, and then explain what's going on. Okay, so what we're saying is this. You press the key on the keyboard or your controller or whatever. That makes the collider box, because that's what the script is attached to, it makes that collider box move along the z-axis. We then say, go ahead and run that coroutine. In that coroutine, it says, okay, so this is moving at that velocity. Wait for half a second, and then reverse it. So since it moved this velocity for this amount of time, we would need to have it run the opposite velocity for the same amount of time, and then be in a resting position. So you're moving out forward for half a second, then you're moving back the same speed for the same amount of time, bringing it back to its original location. At least theoretically it should, there shouldn't be any interference, and then have it rest. So how do we know if this is actually working? We are going to, this is the only time where it's a little bit challenging because it's invisible. So if it's not working right, we'll add a sprite to it. Okay, brief splice there because the first try did not work. Very simple. I just had forgotten to put trigger here, so I even said it when I was looking at the script, but the success collider box When I made it, I forgot to set it as a trigger, so as I said, that in the note control, this only works for triggers, so it didn't work. I also nudged it forward just a little bit, and I tweaked how long it runs. It was half a second, I changed it to 3/4 second. So those three quick things. So in the string 1 script, I bumped it up to 3/4 of a second. I nudged it forward ever so slightly, but it needs to stay behind the fail collider. That way, if the note isn't being played, if the string isn't being played, then the note will collide with the fail first. And then the third thing, like I said, is I had to set this to trigger, and now it should work. So first, we'll let it hit the fail to make sure that it's still behind it, and it is. So the success collider is behind that. Now we'll play the note. Disappeared and says success. Now the success collider should have retracted, and this should say fail again. And it did fail because it got all the way to this, and we'll just check the script to make sure there aren't any more successes. So if you click on collapse, it tells you how many instances, and there's only one instance of a success. So that should do it for this lesson. So we've now added a way of detecting a successful collision and a way of actually playing the string for the corresponding note.